This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're going to be talking about
magic users, arcane people, spellcasters.
somebody asked a question about how you play a magic user.
Yeah, I think, and also like, what is it? What makes magic users different than other types of characters that you might play in any kind of game? We're talking about fantasy role-playing games like D&D, but there's other games that have
Magic.
Yes, and people who can cast magic spells. Since D&D is a big monster in the room, or elephant, whatever you want to call it, the big kahuna, we can talk about D&D a little bit. I think a lot of people like playing magic users. I think they're pretty popular type of character to play.
I find that interesting because I think that people fall into different categories. Like they either like to play magic users or they like to play a fighter, or they really, although clerics get a bad rap because people are always going, yeah, you need a cleric to heal people,
And nobody wants to play a cleric?
But I don't think that's true because I think some people do like to play clerics because they do get to use magic.
Right. But I think arcane, I think that's the word you were saying, not divine spellcasters, have a special, I don't know what it is, je ne sais quoi, as the French might say. This element that is just really cool because they can do so much because usually in games, spellcasters can be very powerful.
Well, having played a spellcaster, a sorceress, I can tell you right now that...
In D&D you're talking about?
Yes.
Oh, no, and Shadowrun.
Yeah, I was just a magic user in Shadowrun. I forget what they called it. It wasn't a magician, but it was
That's a magician, I think.
Yeah, it was a
mage.
Yeah. But you can be very powerful, but you also need to have somebody to stand behind because you can get killed really easily. Because you don't have a lot of... As a magic user, you might deal a lot of hit points in your spells, but you can also take a lot of hit points if somebody comes after you.
That's usually they try to mitigate the powerfulness of a spellcaster by making them weak physically, like what is it, like less constitution.
Yeah.
So they don't have as many hit points like in D&D. You have a a lower hit die.
Especially lower level, right?
Right. Like I remember in the original game, a magic user had a D4.
Yeah, that's
and
not
unfortunately, and then usually you wouldn't pick somebody who had like a high constitution, because then you just like, oh, high constitution, higher strength, I'll make him a fighter. But I remember having a magic user who had like one hit point. I'm like, man, I don't see how we stayed alive.
Yeah, you have to be really careful. So they might be more powerful in certain ways, but they're also more likely to
fragile.
Want to resolve things without fighting.
Oh yeah. That's a different aspect of being a magic user. I think they're just because they're so squishy.
Squishy.
That's the term.
I like that term.
Yeah, I like that term too. I remember, I'm gonna go off a little bit tangent, but there was this magazine. I think it was the Fantasy Space Gamer. It had a second iteration, and they promised a game in every issue.
Okay.
So it was like a magazine. It was like the dungeon, like the Dragon magazine.
Right.
And in the one of the first episodes, they had this game that they called Era 10. Now the whole thing about Era 10 is, I guess somebody let out this pacification virus where it pacified the entire galaxy or the known universe, except for a few people who were immune. And what happens is, this is the far future, so the immune people were the ones that did all the fighting for whoever needed to be fought against, and for if you have the causes of wars. And they wore these suits of armor. They were like battle suits. It was a very loose system. They had like, what is it? Like if you wanted to build something, they just had units of some, they call it K units or whatever. And anyway, so the Era 10, the people who were the Battleborn, they called the regular people squishies because they're in this big, huge suit of armor, and you could just literally sit on humans because they weigh a ton, literally. So that was the first time I heard that term squishy, and that was years ago. I think I have that magazine. I think I bought it because It was Felipe's magazine, and then I liked it. I actually wanted to run that game, but I never did run that game.
Okay.
So back to magic users.
You really do go off on tangents sometimes.
Every once in a while. So spellcasters. I think you're the one that mentioned I don't know if you mentioned it or if you read that's what somebody else said, is that when people who play magic users are more apt or more likely to role play more.
Well, what I was reading was that if you're going to play a spellcaster, there's two different ways you can do it. There's the bland way, right, where you go, I'm going to cast a fireball. Or you could explain to everybody that this is what I'm doing. You can see me. I'm gathering up I don't know, when you cast a fireball, because in D&D, there's different things that you do for spells, right? There's either a word component or different components.
Right. There's material components.
You can say, I pull out some little, I don't know what it takes to cast a fireball. I can't remember. But
whatever it is.
Out of my pouch, I pull out 3 little beads, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden you see fire shoot from my hand, right?
Right.
So you have, when you're playing a spellcaster, you have the ability to put more role playing into it, right? To explain what you're doing, or to say, instead of just saying, I cast a fireball, here I'm going to roll my 16 dice now to see how much damage I do, versus you can also, like you were talking about before, when you were playing a magic user, but you wanted to make your character look like a knife thrower because you didn't want anyone to know you were a magic user.
Right.
Because you were really squishy.
In D&D.
Or was it really squishy because you were first level.
Yeah. That was in Pathfinder, actually.
Yeah.
We were playing Pathfinder Society games.
So you have the ability to make your character more, to role play it out more in that essence, right?
Right.
You can put more flavor into what you're doing, right? Especially like, say, if you play is it a wizard or where you have to memorize your spells each day?
That's a wizard, yes.
So Ian always, when he plays it, he always says, in the morning, I want to take the last watch because then I can sit and do my memorization of my spells for the day.
Right.
So you envision him sitting there on the ground, cross-legged, memorizing his spells while he's watching, right?
Supposedly watching, right?
Yeah.
Another thing is that, what is it about doing something like that is that you gotta. I remember him asking, "So what are we gonna do today or tomorrow?"
Right.
And so and then people would go, "What do you mean?" And that's what happened not almost every time, but quite a few times. He goes, and the other players were like, what do you mean by that? He goes, well, are we going to get into combat or are we just going to stay in town? And so he would decide what spells to take by what supposedly they were going to do. Sometimes they wouldn't stick to the plan, but that's the way things usually go.
Yes, because wizards can only memorize so many spells for the day, right? Whereas sorcerers, they have all their spells.
I think there's some switching of spells they can do. Like if they memorize like a certain number of spells, they could I could switch a 3rd level spell for another 3rd level spell or something like that, or for a lower level spell.
Well, you would figure if they were a wizard, they could do that, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean,
but it might take time. It might take them an hour to blah 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 to get the spell going.
Because in the old days, there was none of that. There was no. I mean, the old days, I don't think you could do that in 3rd edition. But I'm not sure. I don't remember that. But actually, for a fact, in original D&D and AD&D and possibly 2nd edition, none of that was possible.
It's pretty cool though, because there's other things like if you're a sorcerer, you get your power from somewhere, right? Like sometimes it's inborn in you.
Oh,
like
yeah.
You come from the dragons, right?
You're dragonborn.
And so I always thought it was interesting, and I think it always made sense to me that, if your skin starts glowing right before you cast a spell or something, so there's telltale signs of what's going to happen. So your party members might discover this, right, as she's leave her alone, get out of her way, because she's starting to shine as in the sun. she's getting shiny.
Well, I remember you just yelling, "Get out of my way!" or clear the way. I forget what you would yell about in front of you, because you were really passionate about throwing lightning bolts, and
those fighters kept trying to get in my way.
And they're pretty indiscriminate, those lightning bolts sometimes. So yeah, I think. So I don't know. I think you're right in a certain sense, just because of the nature of people who play magic users. I think they just inherently are just more apt to role play because sometimes magic users are not all about combat. So there's other skills that they also have usually.
Yeah.
Well, like for example, in D&D 5th edition, and I think even 3rd edition, sorcerers, because that's a different kind of magic, their magic, their force comes from their charisma. That's their stat that they use. So if you have a high charisma, that means you're also could be a diplomatic person or the face of the group because you have a high charisma stat, which makes you more apt to talk to people, in the system.
Yes.
Whether you are more, have a silver tongue or not, that doesn't matter. I guess. I did have description as another trait of magic users. They usually are more descriptive, and I think that comes from that kind of thing where they just want to describe what they're doing while they're casting. You're right. There is. I don't know. Do they still have the verbal?
Yes, there's verbal component.
The signal. They have to move their hands
verbal
and material.
There's different components.
VSM.
Right? Yeah.
And that was back in even AD&D where they had the VSM, and you would have to carry all this stuff, or you would have to make these like hand gestures, whatever you would come up with, or material components. And then there was verbal, right? So you would have to say something. Now, depending on the GM, some GMs would say, well, you really have to, you can't like wiggle your little finger and throw a fireball. Like the bigger the spell, the more you have to do these arm movements, not even just move your hands, but you're like doing these weird, I don't know, you're tracing out some script in the sky.
Sigil in the sky.
Right. And so that would just put a big target on you, I think. That's why.
Well, see, for my sorceress, I like wore a pouch, right?
Of course.
So that I had the stuff, so that was my thing, and I had talked to you about it before. I go, because I was kind of trying to figure out what the VSM meant, right?
Right.
But we worked it out that if I was wearing the pouch, then I had all the components,
the material components,
so I didn't have to like stop along the side of the road to grab dirt or whatever.
Yeah. Well, usually they were weird stuff,
yes,
right? It's not like
Ian, because he likes to play a magic user, usually a wizard, always would go, well, I need to get these feathers from blah, 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 and carry them with me.
Yeah. Well, some of the material components are like really tough to get.
Right.
I think
there's one that you have to have some kind of gem or something.
Right. Oh, there's a couple. I think to raise the dead, you have to have like a 5,000 piece gem.
Yeah.
And some spells they say when you throw it, it like shatters or makes the gem worthless. But anyway, so that's I think description and being part of and being a wizard kind of go hand in hand because you want to like describe what you're doing. I mean, there's some people out there, fireball. Okay, you know what a fireball looks like. But some people go, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna, like you said, describe what they're doing in detail and preparation for the spell.
Or but there are people that have a hard time with the role playing aspect sometimes, right. And so you can't push people like what are you need to describe for me what you're doing.
Yeah. That's something that usually you should just let the player. I mean, you can ask, can you be more descriptive as to what you're doing when you throw a spell? And I think most people will get it. Will say, okay, I'm going to this is what I'm doing. And then you don't have to describe that every time. But
well, and as you get, usually you start out at first level when you're playing a game, right? So all the characters and the people that you're playing with are going to get to know different things you say. Like if you tell them,
get out,
get out, yeah. And all of a sudden a lightning bolt comes out of you, then, there you go.
Yeah, I think that what happens then is that they don't like their back being burned by lightning. So they move out of the way. Or
you're a first level sorcerer, so you don't have a lot of spells, right? And they're not really powerful. Usually it's magic missiles, right?
Right.
So you tell the fighter in the group, stand in front of me. I'm going to stand behind you because I need you to protect me while I do this.
Yeah, I remember. Well, you did that quite a bit.
I did that a lot.
And for some reason,
Alan,
who wasn't even a fighter, I think he was a rogue, was the one that.
Well, sometimes he was a fighter, sometimes he was a rogue.
Well, at the time that I remember things went a little wonky was when he was a rogue, and I'm like, why are you choosing the rogue to stand behind? Hey, come with me. Well, because I guess you would try to backstab people.
Yes, that he wanted to get behind them.
So
yeah,
but you know.
But you do different things, right? So the people that you're playing with are going to realize what you're doing, and then that gives the game more flavor for.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody would just like in the group. Whether it was funny because it was in Shadowrun and in D&D when you would yell, "Get out of my way" or "Clear the way." I forget what you'd say, something like that. People would actually make sure they go, "Where is she?" You know, they're always like, "Where is she?" All right, I'm gonna jump this way. I mean, they wouldn't even like just say they moved. They say they jump
because a couple of times, like Steve goes, "Oh, I'm just gonna stay here." I go, "You're in my way." He goes, "It's okay. I can take the hit points." And I'm like going, "You're such a dork." One, you wouldn't say that in a real fight, right?
I can take it. Okay,
go ahead, burn me.
Yeah. Make me into a crispy critter. Yeah, he did do that, right? And you did nail him.
Then I had to heal him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of funny. That in itself is funny, and that might happen. Like if he really thought that he was in a position that he didn't want to give up, whatever that. I don't remember the situation.
I don't know if lightning, if a huge lightning, a column of lightning is coming at you, just get out of the way, people. Well, and since they were fighters and they were all really powerful
Wasn't
fighters,
he a cleric?
He was a cleric at that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but
if it probably felt he can heal himself if you did too much damage to him.
But I was like, what, 5th or 6th level at the time,
so throwing 8 dice.
So I was throwing a lot of dice for that. So.
Yeah,
but it does add flavor to the game, right?
I think so.
Different kinds of things.
Oh, definitely.
Like that.
Oh, look at that whole situation. He'll get out of my way, and he goes, "No, I'm going to just stay here." And you throw the spell anyway, or you're in the midst of throwing the spell. I think it's funny to me.
You wouldn't let me not throw the spell because you said I had already started it.
Well,
or something like it was.
Probably was just being mean to Steve, but
yeah. Exactly. You were not mean, but you were like, well, you told him to get out of the way. He doesn't want to get out of the way. I'm like, well, I could move. Nope.
I don't know what the situation is when you are going to throw a spell and at the last minute you decide not to.
That could be bad.
I mean, I could just say, well, you lose that spell.
Cassandra has blown up where she was standing.
I mean, it depends. It depends on the game, right? But in D&D, I don't know. I hate to say, but I don't really know what happens if you say you're going to throw a spell because spells,
you could ask the boys and they could tell you.
Spells are supposed to take place instantaneously.
Right. That's the thing.
Right.
So if your sorceress is saying get out of the way, a lightning bolt is, and you know that she's going to throw a lightning bolt, the chances of if you don't get out of the way, you're going to get slammed by a lightning bolt, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think it depends, how the GM plays in their own style. They could say, well, if you're saying you're going to throw a lightning bolt, either throw a lightning bolt or you lose the spell. So I think that's probably the easiest thing to do. Now, you could have thrown the lightning bolt straight into the sky and nothing would have happened. So you could still have that kind of, what is it?
Out or...
That kind of liberty. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not liberty is not the word, but that kind of decision making that you make. You could direct the spell which way direction. So up is always a problem.
Unless you're in a cave, but in a cave, don't throw a lightning bolt. That's just my own suggestion.
Unless it's a very long cave. I think it dissipates after a while, but I think lightning bolts does bounce off walls. I think you can.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah. And worse if you make chain lightning.
Yeah. Oh, Steve tried to do that in a cave once, chain lightning. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah. This cave's walls are almost, what do you call it? Really smooth, mirror smooth. So I think another thing I wrote down about magic users, because they're so weak usually at the lower levels, they got to be more creative in how they approach things, right? And problems. They might want to make sure that they don't get in the situation where there's no where they're backed into a corner. However that is depending on the situation. But you don't want to be by yourself and then against 5 thugs in an alleyway or something like that. Or
not when you have 8 hit points.
Right. Or in a dungeon if you're below ground in a tomb or whatever, and you wander off by yourself and my paladin got jumped.
You should never wander off by yourself
by giant skeletons and get critically killed or critically wounded.
I think it opens up negotiations, not like one of my favorite movies,
The Fifth Element,
where Bruce Willis negotiates. But
it was Corbin Dallas who.
Yes, But actual negotiations
Real negotiations.
Or, trying to solve the problem before the fighters. Because to me, the fighters are always standing behind you, ready to, they have their sword half pulled out, or the dwarf is loosening his axe, right, ready to go. But you're trying to go, we don't need to fight these people. And they're like standing, in my mind, they're standing right behind you, getting ready to do it with no matter what, because they're ready, because they don't know what's going to happen, right? That we'll give you a chance to negotiate.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think just because of the nature of magic users, they're usually considered wiser, right? And whether you're playing D&D or not, like where sorcerers use charisma, so they're usually have like diplomatic spells, not spells, but skills, and they have advantages of having a better interactions with people or whatever, and I think that's what's interesting about spellcasters is that usually they fit that secondary role where they're the face of the party, because usually they're more learned, right? They have a higher intelligence, or
but you got to read all those things to learn all those spells,
right? And so they know stuff, and they're more. And I hate to use the word more intelligent, but they're more knowledgeable about stuff. I mean, in game, and because of that, a lot of times I would think that they would be the ones who would be talking to people, because they are the ones that they just know more stuff. Where I kind of like if you using like stereotypes, like Conan is just give me kill, right? And then you have like Doctor Strange, because he's Doctor Strange. Even if he didn't have all these mystical powers, he just knows a lot of stuff because he read a lot of stuff, so he can throw these spells and knows consequences of his spells and all this other stuff. And these formulas that they have to memorize and these components that they have to mix. And that's something that is, to me, it's like they study, right?
Right.
Right. So I think magic users fit that part of, I don't know, the group, right? That they're the face man, they're the people that talk.
It depends on the magic user, right? If they're a tiefling wizard, you might not want them to be the face of the group, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But wizards have to have a lot of intelligence, right? And sorcerers a lot of charisma, right. So it does kind of depending on, and it depends on the players too, because sometimes the fighter is the one that is the person at the table that talks the most, right? Or is ready to ask the questions. Usually the barbarian at the table, if they do want to ask the questions, I mean, you gotta take into consideration things like, if this big giant guy is coming at you and asking you questions, is he, how much skill does he have in because it's going to be intimidation versus charisma. I mean, I don't know what the stats are for intimidation, but
yeah, I mean, I think there is that point that where whatever game you're playing, you see this hulking dude with this big old sword. Do you really want to talk to him?
Yeah.
And do you want to take the risk of like him understanding or misunderstanding what you're trying to say, where you have a little bit, next to him, let's say there's a cultured, he's dressed nice. Usually they're not grubby.
Yeah, usually.
Usually magic users take care about what clothes they wear and other stuff. So, I mean, which one would you rather talk to? And I think you're going to gravitate to somebody who, and not only that, they're not bristling with weapons, right?
It's most likely not going to be the tiefling in your group, right?
Well, there's that too. But at the very least, just looking at what they're carrying,
right?
You have, unless it's like a paladin who theoretically looks really clean and nice, and I think
paladins do come off with a big authority, right?
Right.
They look like they're in charge, whether they're in charge or not.
Right.
They probably think they are, so they come off.
They look the part.
They're the ones that they're wearing a 10 suit and have huge, either a sword or a mace or something. Right? Well,
I was just thinking about they showed a preview of the new D&D movie that's coming out next in 2023, and I think that the guy who plays the paladin is the guy who plays the Duke in that period piece, in that period show, Bridgerton.
Okay.
The Duke.
Okay.
The African American. I don't think he's American.
No, he's British.
British. The black guy. He's a paladin, and at one point, he's doing his, he's killing everything, right? And they're like, oh, and then they say, I'm really glad he joined the group or whatever, or he's with us. But you see him and he's all clean, right? He's not all dirty, because they make him look really nice. And he's a handsome dude. So when he takes off his helmet, he's like, oh. And I think that kind of characterization is what usually people envision a paladin being like.
Right.
And so when you role play that, it's like when he goes to town, everybody's going to say, oh, he's obviously trustworthy. He's not going to lie to me, stuff like that. Those are things that are attributed, things that might be attributed to a paladin, that they're not going to lie to him and stuff. So he might be the person that you want to talk to. And I think in AD&D, and I'm not sure about 3rd edition, but in AD&D, you had to have a high charisma to even become a paladin.
Right.
I think your charisma had to be like 17. So it was pretty high. And I don't think they kept that in 3rd edition and moving forward, because now you can be anything you want with no restrictions. But back then you had to have a high charisma. So you might gravitate toward him or her, the paladin in the group, to negotiate with. But then again, he's bristling with weapons, so I think
and he's probably grumpy.
And I would say that. But so you look at the magic user and you say, well, he's just kind of a strange looking dude with his robes, but at least I don't think he's gonna stab me right away. He might turn me into something unnatural. So another thing on the list that I have is because of the situation when they're lower levels or starting out, they're weaker magic users, they're more likely to solve problems without combat. Yeah. And sometimes, even though, like, for example, D&D is combat heavy, right? Everybody talks it's a combat game, blah, blah, blah. And I tend to agree. A lot of the spells, a lot of the rules are about combat. A lot of spells are dealing damage. But there's a few spells that are not dealing damage, right? And I think when you're creative with those spells, you can really have just a really fun time throwing different combinations of spells to either incapacitate people or make them not being able to attack you. Like there's a barrier walls and there's grease, you can make them slip and fall and all these other kinds of things. So I think a smart player will look at a magic user and be able to use other spells to their advantage that aren't necessarily like combat or fighting type of things, or like obviously like magic missiles. It's something where you're definitely hurting somebody else.
But there's the light one, where you make dancing lights.
Yes, and it confuse people and stuff like that. And you can use that to like different ways. I remember, I think it was in the first game that I ran, not the first game I ran, but when I ran the campaign, I called To the King, where I think there was I don't know what they were, but they were in trouble. They were hiding from somebody, and they, I think they threw silence or something so they can get out of the house, the mansion, unnoticed, which didn't quite work, but still, so stuff like that I think is like where a role that the magic user doesn't fit. Like I think in this place, he was with a rogue, and the rogue made his sneak whatever roll. And he didn't want to make his sneak roll because he wasn't very good. So he decided. I think the person decided to throw like silence. He had silence spell, so because he knew he was breaking into a house. So that's the kind of stuff that I think makes magic users more creative in a sense, or not creative, but more likely to solve a problem outside of combat and to avoid combat too. Because as a young or a starting out wizard or magic user, a lot of times, like we've talked already, is that you're not very strong. You don't have a lot of stamina points, hit points, whatever the game points mean that when you run out, you die. So I think that's pretty neat. I think that to be able to not have combat, because even though D&D, like I said, is a combat intensive game, I'm very what is it? It's refreshing to see players not resort to combat right away. Right. And I think it's pretty fun. Now, a lot of people say that people in many games, magic users are too powerful when they get to certain levels or a higher experience and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of true. I think a lot of times in fifth edition, this was a person was criticizing D&D fifth edition because they're trying to balance everything, right? That because wizards are so strong at higher levels, the other character classes, they made them like uber classes, right? They can do all these things with these feats and powers and stuff like that. And he was saying that it was an article he wrote that in the old days they didn't care about balance like AD&D. They said, well, the only thing that was a sort of a balancing factor was that, for example, if you were a thief, it took you 1,000 experience points to go up a level. But if you were a magic user, it took you like 2,200 points. So that was the balancing thing where magic users took a long time to go up levels, and fighters and thieves and stuff like that took less. So they would progress to higher levels. Like you would be like an 8th level fighter, and there would be like a 5th level magic user. So the magic user is still kind of squishy, but he can throw spells that are pretty decent at 5th level and 6th level. And the other people in the group had more hit points and stuff like that. But in the end, magic users could definitely like just blow away the other classes, except maybe a cleric, but even the clerics. So he was saying that the whole idea of 5th edition being so balanced is that it's caused the other character classes to be like uber powered, and so because everybody wants to be like on even keel at the being able to handle the same type of stuff, and that's just not the way magic users are usually portrayed in books or in movies, right? Look at Gandalf. Gandalf is this super powerful dude, and you're playing Frodo, or let's say Bilbo, who's a thief theoretically, a burglar. They don't care about balance. I mean, there's multiple shows on TV where the magic users, like Dresden Files, right? Here's this guy who's a magic user. He's a sorcerer. What they call him? A wizard, right? He's a wizard or whatever it's called. I think he's a wizard. And he has like people next to him, around him, who are just like mundane mortals. And there's no way that they're balanced. But mortals can definitely I forget the name of his Murphy.
Murphy, yeah.
You know, she's just a cop.
But she has a gun. She can, hello.
Yeah, but a cop with a gun versus, let's say, vampires, it's very tough.
Right. That's when you need to run, by the way, in Dresden.
There's other games other than D&D out there, Shadowrun. And I like the way Shadowrun handles magic is because no matter how powerful you are, you get to decide how much power you're going to load into the spell or force you're going to use in the spell. So if you have... and
you can put a lot of force into it.
Put a lot of force.
But you're going to you have a chance of taking a big fall on your butt and hurt yourself.
Well, their mechanic is that you have to... It's not fade. It's...
you have to roll against the
power of the spell.
Yeah.
For blowback or something they call it, right? So if you make your roll, then nothing happens. You're good. But if you fail the roll, it depends about how. Does it matter by how bad you fail the roll?
Yeah, there's a
chart or something.
Yeah.
So then you start taking damage.
By the number of the bad dice that you roll, you have to take a certain amount of damage.
Right. So you could and it was funny because
you can knock yourself out.
Right. That's the funny.
I've done that in Shadowrun.
Because you want to really give a whopping punch to this monster, whatever you're facing, and you're like, this is really high. And so then you're taking a chance. Well, what's my chances of like a saving throw?
You choose. How important is it to kill this monster, whatever you're fighting? Usually, it's something really bad.
Right, let's
the
boss monster or whatever you call it. Right.
Then it's your choice. You choose how much force you're going to.
And how desperate you are as a player.
Yeah.
Or character. So you did knock yourself out one time.
I've knocked myself out.
Stunned yourself.
I knocked myself out. They had to pick me up and carry me out because I wasn't going to wake up anytime soon.
I think it's really cool. I really like that idea. And that's to me seems more what I see and read and see in movies and read in books.
Dresden. If you read the Dresden books, but if you play Dresden, or not Dresden himself, but if you play the Dresden game, you know that you're going to get hurt, right?
Right.
But you balance it out with how badly do you need to do something versus how much pain you're going to be in afterwards.
Right.
I think D&D does have the thing with D&D is that you only get so many spells, right?
Right.
So if you're in the middle of this huge fight, and it's happened to me before, you're going to run out of spells, and then you're going to pull out your daggers, and you're going to try to stand behind someone and not get killed.
Exactly.
So it does balance it out that way.
Yeah, but I just say I like the idea of that kind of decision making on player, whether how much power they want to put into a spell, knowing that the more power, the more chances of them getting hurt or even knocked out. And I don't know if you can get killed.
Yes, you can. Because
you
you take a certain kind of damage, then you take physical damage.
You take stun and then you take physical. So if you really max out or go nuts.
You'd have to be really desperate to do that.
You'd be the hero, right?
But then there's also the, in Shadowrun, part of the magic is you can do astral stuff, right?
Right.
So you're literally leaving your body.
Yes.
So you need someone to watch your body or have your body in a very safe place.
Right. So that's another thing is that when you do that astral stuff is like you're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And they make a point is that you're very vulnerable.
You could die. Someone could kill you and you'd be dead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's pretty cool. I like that idea of that kind of magic and how that works. Another real quick, I just want to hear like a different thing because we've been talking about D&D so much. It uses a Vancian system. That's what they call it. It was based on Jack Vance, and he wrote some books, and it's similar to how that magic system worked in one of his books. Maybe it was the Dying Earth series. I'm not sure, but anyway, that's what they call it. And there's always been this one alternative called the point system, right, where each spell is worth so many points, and each character or your magic user has so many points to spend per period of time, like per day. And in this case, instead of having spell slots where I can only throw fireball 3 times, you're giving a bulk of points to spend, and then you can spend it any way you want in any combination, and you possibly could throw more higher level spells, but they use up your points faster, obviously. Right. And I really like that idea because that gives the magic user a little bit more.
5th edition does that, but it costs you, like, they call them spell points, and it costs you a certain number of spell points per level. So
right, but this is entirely and
just points.
Just points. Every spell has a point, and I think it's even in the D&D is the optional point system, but I'm not sure. But I know there's systems out there that there's people who homebrewed that kind of system, saying they've gone through the spell book, at least in the regular core books, and said this spell or these level spells cost this much. Your first level, you get this many points. And even as a first level, you can just throw all your points into Fireball if you have enough points for it, which you would never be able to do
regularly
in the regular system. So I think that kind of system, which gives the magic user a lot of leeway, I think I really like that system, even though D&D is not like that, and the D&D that I played the most probably, I really like the spell point system.
There's other games. I mean, the games that we've been talking about, alternative games to D&D, right, where the magic is a lot darker, right? Where you're gonna throw a spell, but you might get chaos, or you're only gonna be able to use magic every once in a while. Call of Cthulhu is a good example. Right.
It's not the magic users in Call of Cthulhu.
And the reason is because you're going to go insane a lot faster.
Right. Because I think it's just considered forbidden knowledge, right? Because that's weird.
You don't want to know that.
And every time you're exposed to forbidden knowledge, every time you try to use forbidden knowledge,
you got to do sanity.
You got to, I don't know if there's
you lose sanity or you have to do sanity check.
Or you automatically lose sanity. So I think it's
just straight down slope. but the grittier games, as Saul likes to call them, magic is usually tied to dark forces, right? So
chaos.
So you have to use it sparingly,
and only when you really need to.
And you probably need to do something to heal yourself afterwards in a way to keep your sanity or whatever.
I think I played. I ran Bethorn, which is a rule set for Empire Pedal Throne by Jeff D, and he uses a skill point system for spells, and I really liked it. I mean, I really liked it myself because when I was like making characters for the game, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And when the players were playing, they were like, oh yeah, so they were able to pick and choose. There was, I think, only one or two spellcasters in the group that I made, and they were really both like, oh, and they really liked the list of spells that they were able to throw, and then be able to choose what spells they wanted to throw, and it had nothing to do with levels or anything like that.
Right.
So I think it's pretty cool. So playing a magic user, I think is probably one of the funner. It's
more
a lot
enjoyable.
Of fun. It's a lot of fun.
An enjoyable character.
A lot of people really enjoy playing magic users in whatever game they're playing, and I think just because it's just like what is it? There's just so many. It's part of our like our fantasy myth culture, right? Like Tolkien, because of Tolkien's been around so long. Now, excuse me. The Gandalf, everybody considered as a wizard, but there's other stories where the even movies where the wizard was always like if not the main character, he was a big character in the book or movies. So I think that's pretty neat, and I think a lot of people want to kind of reenact that kind of feeling that
or
they
experience
that in the movie, that they saw in a movie or read in a book.
So there you go.
There's it.
This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.